Sodom and Gomarrah, the cities of the plain. In Genesis 19, we read how these cities were destroyed by God with brimstone and fire from heaven, the first biblical record of God's vengeance upon evil since the Great Flood. My husband, biblical archaeologist Ron Wyatt, never planned to search for these cities, but in 1989, while working on another project, he was suddenly impressed to stop and examine some odd-shaped, whitish-colored formations along the western shore of the Dead Sea. After driving past these at least 30 or 40 times in the past 12 years, this time they suddenly looked like the shapes of city walls and buildings. Pulling over, he and his crew closely examined these desolate areas. Taking samples of the material, they discovered that they broke right off in their hand and disintegrated into dust the consistency of talcum powder, as Greg Brewer shows us here. In August of 1990, Ron returned to these sites to thoroughly explore them, 5 sites which he had thus far located. I accompanied him this trip along with Marv and Renetta Wilson of Garland, Texas. As we approached the first site we examined, we all could easily see the shapes Ron had described. As no roads led into these areas, we pulled our car off the road and began the long, difficult hike. There was no doubt that these areas were unique to the immediate surrounding area. It was very difficult to walk there, for the loose material made walking an arduous chore. Following what clearly looked like the shape of an outer wall, we soon met with a most breathtaking sight. The wall had ended, and we were now looking down into what appeared to be the entrance into the city. But before we entered, our interest was captivated by a most unusual find. About 100 yards from the entrance, upon a high level, was a singular shape. As we viewed it from all angles, we all agreed it plainly bore the shape of a sphinx. We later found more of these sphinx shapes, which we'll see later in the film. As we entered the open section, we soon found ourselves walking along very distinctive paths which communicated with one another just as our streets today. As we approached what appeared to be a dead end, we found it turned to the right and continued along until it met another street. There was distinct order here. These were clearly once streets, and along these streets were the shapes of buildings. Even to our untrained eye, the evidence was undeniable. The ziggurat shape near the entrance was almost perfectly preserved. Our research had yielded the fascinating fact that substances burned with sulfur or brimstone had a remaining ash that was heavier than the initial unburned substance. That explained our question as to why the ash of these cities had been able to remain all these 3,900 years. The layering present in all the formations was another positive evidence that whatever these once were, they had been burned at temperatures exceeding 4,000 or 5,000 degrees. This layering effect was the result of thermal ionization. Whenever a substance is burned at extremely high temperatures, the ions of the various substances being burned attract and repel, distorting the flame. Ron drew our attention to features present here which simply do not occur naturally. He showed us a section which revealed a broken double wall which extended toward us at a perfect 90-degree angle. Over the many years, the ash of these cities had eroded to such a degree that it caused the thick layer of loose ash, which made walking so difficult. This, combined with the heat that was well over 100 degrees and the intense glare of the sun off of the whitish remains, hampered our exploration somewhat. The cities were so large, we knew it would take weeks to complete our exploration of even this one, so we decided to move on to a different area. We found a site where we could easily climb onto a high section. Here, on a distinct platform-like area, we found another sphinx shape next to a ziggurat shape. Climbing this ziggurat, we found we could view the remains from a very good angle. The site we were examining was located at the base of Masada, and soon we all decided that we should go to the top of Masada and film these areas from there. As we took the cable car to the top, the view was breathtaking. The shape of the city was perfectly revealed below us. Here we saw a giant platform-like area, perfectly symmetrical, which was identical to the temple areas of other ancient cities, such as the biblical Shushan or Susa, located in present-day Iran. Then we saw the raised section which we had climbed upon earlier, with the sphinx shape and the ziggurat. We were all convinced, but we also knew there had to be more evidence than this to convince others. We returned home, and we all began to pray. If these areas were indeed the ashen remains of the cities of the plain, Ron felt sure that God had preserved something which would confirm these sites beyond a shadow of a doubt. A few months later, in October of 1990, he returned. This time, he took Richard Reeves of Matthews, North Carolina. They drove out to this same site and discovered it had just rained, a very rare occurrence in this area which receives less than 2 inches of rain annually. The rain had washed away the loose ash. Ron began his research by using the molecular frequency generator to test for the presence of any metals. Setting the frequency for gold, he got a positive reading. Yet all they were able to find, we later learned from the lab test, was gold salts, the byproduct of vaporized gold. Then Richard saw what looked like a cave, and he and Ron went over to get a closer look. Realizing the danger of it perhaps caving in on them, they decided against entering it. But as they had approached the cave, Ron noticed a very large chunk that had freshly fallen from a high section, probably due to the rain. As he examined this fallen section, he found the evidence we had all prayed for. All through the fallen ash, like berries in a muffin, were reddish-colored rings surrounding yellow balls of sulfur. Looking around, they saw that these rings were everywhere. We have no doubt that our prayers were answered, for it was only when the rain had washed away the loose ash which clung to everything that these became visible.
Okay, we're down at Sodom and Gomarrah still. Right in front of you see some unusual looking spots on this, shall we say, layer of ash. It's not stone, it's ash. Now we'll move in for a close-up of this. And you can see that they're kind of circular shaped places. Now what we have found, and we'll move in a little closer here, is that inside each of these is sulfur. That is in most of them. Now the ones that do not have sulfur in them And this one we just took a bunch of sulfur out and put it in our specimen bag. But the ones that don't have sulfur have a very black center where they have, where it's been very hot. So now we'll move in on this one where there is some sulfur still present, and back off just enough so you can see what we're up to here, and we'll go collect that sample in a bag. Before I started using this knife, it was very, very sharp. Okay, here this is, and we have collected some more, and it smells and tastes like sulfur. Now the Bible tells us that it rained fire and brimstone upon the cities of Sodom and Gomorrah. Now what you see in front of you here is the results of large and small, well, varying sized chunks of sulfur, burning sulfur that have hit. And what we find here is that God rained this burning sulfur down upon this city, and rain is a perfect description of it. It landed just in the pattern that rain would fall, and the stuff, of course, the accumulative heat of all of this upon the city set the entire thing ablaze. The flashpoint of every material there, metal, stone, of course the people, and everything burned, and this sulfur continued to burn, and it vitrified the material around it after it had burned it all up, sealed itself off from the oxygen, and then of course smothered itself out. And in each of these little crystalline capsules here is a varying size chunk of sulfur, and there are millions of these in these ashes that we have here. Now some of them we have cracked open so you can see the sulfur inside, and others we have left intact, but there are millions of these here. So this shows that God indeed rained fire and brimstone upon these cities. And if you'll look in your dictionary, under brimstone you'll find that it is sulfur. Now here's one of these sulfur capsules that is embedded in this material, and if you look closely you can see the large amount of sulfur right in the center of the darker ring, and that particular one has a large quantity of just pure sulfur. Now once you become aware of how this happened out here and look around, we see just no end of these large blobs of sulfur. That particular one there is in the neighborhood of probably 10-15 pounds, where they've been open to air. The capsule that's around them from the vitrified ash is gone, and just the sulfur is sticking out. But everywhere the eye goes, we see more and more and more of these. Just no end to them. It shows that they rained upon the city at close approximations, and the combined heat of all of these set the whole thing fire.
As soon as he got home from that trip, Ron took several of the samples to Galbraith Labs near Knoxville, Tennessee. The yellow balls in the center of the reddish rings proved to be 95.72% sulfur, with traces of several other elements, all of which he was told would contribute to an extremely high temperature fire. When Ron asked them if they could perform a BTU test to determine the degree of heat this would give off, he was told that they couldn't because it would damage their stainless steel testing chamber. The material surrounding the encapsulated sulfur was also tested and proved to be ash. At home, we did our own small test and burned some of the sulfur in a spoon. The purplish flame is indicative of the intense heat, which prohibited our holding the spoon as it burned. We later discovered our spoon had holes in it from the fire. Then, we placed a small piece of the outer material also in the spoon and attempted to burn it, but it wouldn't burn at all. It didn't even darken. It was already completely consumed by fire, and nothing was left to ignite. Sodom and Gomarrah, Admah and Zeboim, and Bela, or Zor. We've seen some of the evidence, but now where are these sites located? The one we have just been in is located here, just below Masada, in a plain bordering the Dead Sea. The largest site is located here, behind the largest rock salt mountain in the world, Mount Sodom. Looking at a satellite photo of the area, the squarish shape of the city can be seen. This one too rested on the plain, with one side nestled to the impassable mountains to the west. The smallest one can be seen here. It is located here, and we feel confident in identifying this one as Bela or Zor. The square shape, so readily visible, tells us quite a bit about the city. In his book, Ancient Mesopotamia, by A. Leo Oppenheim, page 134, we read, quote, "Square, rectangular, and round cities are typically new foundations." End quote. He explains how, as the cities grow in population, they expand their boundaries as needed, and never would the expansion radiate outward evenly on all sides. Remember how Lot pleaded with the angel to allow him to flee to Zor, for, he said, "It is a little one." If this is Zor, we feel equally confident in calling this site behind Mount Sodom, Sodom. We also must note the great salt mountain interposes between these two sites. If the salt pillar of Lot's wife still stands, we believe it would be in this area. The site below Masada is the second largest site and the best preserved. We believe this would have been Gomarrah. Now, to find the next site, we must go north to the tip of the Dead Sea. Admittedly, this is not even in the region most people assume these cities were. There is no later scriptures to help us locate this one, which we believe was Admah. So we will go to the last one, Zeboim. The last site is even further north. It lies here. Again, this is far from the commonly accepted areas for these cities, but in searching the scriptures, we found a most astonishing passage. In 1 Samuel chapter 13, verses 16 through 18, we read how the Philistines set up camp in Michmash. Dividing into 3 companies, one went north unto the way that leadeth to Ophrah. One went west, the way to Beth-horon, while the third went east, the way of the border that looketh to the valley of Zeboim, towards the wilderness. Even though it had been hundreds of years since its destruction, the name of Zeboim still remained. It was common for new cities or new areas to receive the name of an old destroyed one in the area, such as the 3 Jerichos which span over 3,000 years. What evidence does the Bible give for the locations? The first mention is in Genesis 10:19, when the boundaries of the Canaanites are given. And the border of the Canaanites was from Sidon, as thou comest to Gerar, unto Gaza, as thou goest unto Sodom, and Gomarrah, and Admah, and Zeboim, even unto Lasha, or Laish, which later was known as Dan. If we place these cities at the traditional site, all clustered together at the southern end of the Dead Sea, would that description make a lot of sense? We also have scriptures which tell us where these cities were not. As the borders of the Canaanites, we know that these cities were Canaanite. The area east of the Dead Sea, especially the southern end, was known as Moab and Seir. In Deuteronomy 2, verses 9 through 12, the Lord was telling Moses not to distress the people of Moab or Seir, and he tells him who dwelt there in the past. The people were called Emims, who were giants, and Horims, but they were not Canaanites. Now, what about the idea that these cities are under the Dead Sea? Again, the Bible tells us clearly. In Genesis 14, soon after Lot chooses Sodom, we are told of an invading army who conquers the cities of the plain and take Lot and his family hostage. These invaders come around from the south, and the king of the cities of the plain come out to meet them in battle in the Vale of Sodom. Now, where is this vale? The Salt Sea. This area was a valley, and it was full of slime pits, and the kings of the cities lost the battle there. The cities were located in the plain, but they were not located in this valley, because verse 8 tells us that the kings went out, and this implies from their cities to battle. Once Ron and Richard had found the sulfur within the hardened capsules of burnt sulfur, the next step was to see if there were other examples of sulfur occurring in this manner. We consulted geologists and chemists, we researched at libraries and universities, and the result is that we have found no other single case of sulfur in this form being found anywhere. What we have learned is that most native sulfur occurs in the crystalline form. Visiting the Smithsonian Museum, we photographed all of their specimens that we could find, and every one was the crystalline form, but none of the round, soft spheres the consistency of pressed powder. We researched where sulfur was to be found, and we came up with 3 locations. Number 1, at or near the crater rims of active or extinct volcanoes where the sulfur was given off from gases. Number 2, and less commonly, it's found in veins associated with sulfide ore minerals. Number 3, and the largest deposits by far, are found in what are called salt domes. And this is sedimentary rocks associated with anhydrite and gypsum and limestone and salt. In these, first we have a layer of limestone, completely barren of sulfur, but usually containing anhydrite and gypsum. Beneath this lies a strata of limestone whose cracks, fissures, and seams may be impregnated with yellow crystals of native sulfur. We cannot overlook the fact that Mount Sodom is a salt dome and may contain native sulfur in its crystalline form. But this does not in any way explain these round sulfur balls in all of this ash. As tempting as it may be to speculate on how God accomplished the destruction of these cities, we will refrain from doing so. The final point we came up with is that we simply find no other instance anywhere of round, pressed powder consistency balls of sulfur surrounded by hardened capsules of burnt sulfur embedded deeply in pure ash anywhere. We don't find them anywhere. Ron and Richard even traveled to the western United States and found a place where sulfur had been given off by volcanic activity. But here you can see it's in a thin layer of crystalline sulfur. The shape of the buildings and city walls was also a subject of our investigation. After all, was it possible that these were just unique, yet still natural? We drove from one end of the Dead Sea to the other many times. The areas before and after these sites were clearly different from them. We stopped to closely examine some of these and found them to simply be solid rock. They also lacked the distinct boundaries we found in the cities and displayed no shapes of structure. We found many characteristics in these sites that were just too much evidence to be coincidence. The Canaanites had built double walls in their cities, one higher than the other. We found this to be consistent throughout the city. We also found numerous raised platform areas which had only one or two structures on them, and this was consistent with temple and worship areas. Ron, with a background in construction, noticed numerous features which he was able to recognize, such as pilasters and a flying buttress. It's difficult for some people to visualize what a walled city looks like. There just aren't many examples around today. This photograph of Jerusalem back in the 1800s will at least give you an idea of how these looked. There's a distinct beginning to these cities, which is the wall around them. One of the first things people notice when we visit this site is that there is a distinct beginning. You drive along and see barren plain, then suddenly there it is. It looks like a wall with inside structures extending above the wall in a few places. The first really exciting discovery Ron made was the Sphinx shape just outside the beginning of this wall on the north side. And this is entirely consistent with the early Mesopotamian practice of having deities protect the entrance into the cities at the city gates.
One of the things that becomes apparent when one looks at this, say, for example, from the top of Masada, is the wall system. What we're looking at here is the typical citadel city. This is where the original city was smaller than the present, or the city that was destroyed, and the pressure of the increasing population caused them to enlarge the cities and extend the walls or build new walls, radiating out from this central or citadel city. Also, we see in these walls pilasters. Now this is a thickening of the wall to give it strength. One of the defensive mechanisms of a wall was to make it resistant to battering rams or attempts to break through these walls from the outside. Other features that we see are, for example, flying buttresses. These were usually associated with inside structures or on the inside of the external wall to act as a support. It would not be a good idea to put these on the outside of the wall because they would be easily knocked down, or they would serve as a refuge for people that were attempting to break through the wall. They could simply get under these flying buttresses and shield themselves from overhead attack. Another feature that we see in these burned out cities is that, typical of ancient cities, they are built astride a mountain stream that would provide the population with all the water they needed for themselves and for whatever other purposes they might have, for example, taking care of their animals. And this is true of all of these 5 locations. Now the streams at the present time have dried up and are only filled a couple of times a year during the rainy season in the winter. But back during this time, we're told that this entire valley here was like the Garden of the Lord, or like the Garden of Eden. So it was obviously very well watered and very fertile before it was destroyed by this fire and brimstone. Now, what we will show you here in fairly rapid succession are a series of restorations of sections and features of these cities that
from research and from the remains that we see here will give you an idea of what these looked like before they were destroyed by fire. Now, the one thing that I would like to specifically draw your attention to, those of you that are familiar with construction techniques in ancient times, you will notice that this temple that is built in the general shape of a ziggurat or pyramid displays the ends of wooden beams at the different floor levels as it goes from bottom to top. Now, this is typical of ancient stone construction. These were to provide ceilings for lower rooms in the structure and floors for higher rooms in the structure, and these are very visible. And these things do not occur in nature. You might find an isolated hole in an area. This is not unusual, but to find them on an exact level at exact intervals, this definitely tells us that these are man-made structures. So anyway, we believe after considerable research, chemical analysis, that these are the remains of the cities of the plains. They have all of the structures associated with ancient cities. They have the ramparts above the cities, the jagged tooth defect, providing a place for people to hide behind the top of the wall and yet be able to fire arrows down at the enemy. And anyway, we see most all of the recognizable features of ancient cities. We also see windows. We also see rooms that have been preserved in the ash. It's dangerous to go into these and examine them very carefully, but these are all indications of a city that was burned by fire, exactly as was described in the book of Genesis. Sodom and Gomarrah, the cities of the plains, enjoyed a beautiful and very prosperous existence. The place where Lot chose, rather than the mountains, to feed his flocks and herds and raise his family. And you'll notice here that we have several feet of nothing but white powdery ash. Ash that's only produced when material is burned at degree temperatures exceeding 2,000 degrees Fahrenheit. This stuff crumbles to powder in your hand, sticks to your clothes. It's just pure ash. In Jude, we're told that they're an example of what will happen to the wicked, even the angels. And of course, in Ezekiel 28, God tells Satan that he will be reduced to ashes upon the earth. And Malachi 4 tells us that the righteous shall tread upon the wicked, for they shall be ashes under the soles of their feet. All that is left of the stones, the wood, the people, the animals, everything that was in Sodom and Gomorrah. You recall that when the fire of God burned the offering on Mount Carmel, when Elijah called the priests of Baal to account, it says that it burned the offering, the stones, and licked up the water out of the trough. So no one will ever find any archaeological remains of the cities of the plain other than these ashes. And friends, if we defy God's kind and merciful entreaty to come to Him and be saved and be renewed and forgiven, we will end up in exactly this condition, because the Word of God tells us so, and God says that He is the Lord. He changes not, neither does He alter the thing that has gone out of His lips.